Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by again. I was looking at this plant. This is the Brassia that I got as a freebie, and I've already decided that the back end's going to come off because it won't lend itself to repotting. And then I just thought, actually, the place where my Oncidium and Brassia types go is a bit full. So I thought, well, looking at the shape of the plant and the way it likes to climb, I think I'll mount it. And as a consequence, I thought, well, I could video that and sort of do a video on how Roger mounts a plant, an orchid. So we'll have a go at that. So same as I did last time, list of essentials. That won't be needed because I won't be using bark. That can go out the way along with all the bark. Obviously, if I'm going to mount something, I will need something to mount it on, which I will have to go out in the garden and get. There will be a short delay. But in the meantime, that's the moss I use. It's basically premium New Zealand sphagnum moss harvested from the pristine environment of New Zealand's southern western coast. Well, it's sterilised moss at the end of the day. It is a reasonable quality moss. It will break down slower than some other cheaper versions. However, it's not 3-star moss because that costs twice as much. So all I actually do is, it's a mount. I won't need a lot of moss. So I estimate roughly, trying not to waste too much. I probably won't need any more than that. So I just put a little bit in a dish, get the pack out of the way, and just get some water in there basically, and it'll start soaking it up straight away. All this business about moss being difficult to wet once it's dry, well, if that was true, that wouldn't have happened, would it? So basically I do not see a problem in moss re-wetting, or I don't. Maybe some others do, maybe it's a different type of moss. Anyway, that's the moss on the go. Sorry, something to dry my hands with. I'm just going to shut down for a minute while I... No, actually, I'll do the pot first. Other essentials. Moss done. We've got a little tiny screwdriver, and that blade has actually been sharpened, which I wouldn't recommend doing with a screwdriver, but I don't use that as a screwdriver. That's going to be used to make a hole in the bark, so I need it sharp. So an extra essential this time. We've still got our sterilised scissors. Wire cutters will be needed. Pliers probably will be needed. I've got some fishing line on a big reel, and I've actually got some wire. The wire I use is actually bonsai wire. The reason I use that rather than like galvanised steel wire is that bends relatively easy, but when it's bent it stays there. Yeah, so it's very easy to work with. And I've got stacks of the flipping stuff because I used to have dozens and dozens and dozens of bonsai that I used to wire up, and I don't tend to do that anymore, so I've got leftovers, so I'm reusing. So I'll stop. Now let's get this out of the pot first, because that's part of the process. This is Brassia Chieftain Ludlows. It's a primary cross in actual fact. I haven't got a clue what's going on in here. What's going on in here? There's a lot of dry roots. They're going to need rehydrating relatively quick. Dead pseudo bulb. Died a long time ago, and I've got a feeling that that was just thrown in a new pot to get rid of it. Typical vendor who doesn't care about their wares. Yeah, as a plant that I want to mount, I do not need from there where my top finger is to there where my bottom finger is. That one's already showing signs of not being happy. That one would just be hanging off the bottom of the mount, so it serves no purpose. So it's coming off near the bottom there. I'm an anti-sheath merchant. Unless I can see a very good reason for a sheath on a plant, as far as I'm concerned, they come off. A good reason for a sheath being on a plant is there's a very delicate new growth coming through. The reason for them not being there is they can often dry and become quite brittle because they're not living in the environment they would be normally, and they can inhibit root growth. You know, the root just hasn't got the strength to push through a dry, crispy sheath. So I take them off, as I say, unless there's a very good reason not to. Right, and the part of the plant I don't want is coming off. Where's a good place to do that? I can see a nub in there which will be a new root. Those roots are not bad. I'm going to take that off there. Okay. And that's a lot of the root system gone. Am I bothered? No, I'm not. Okay, now some of these roots that are left are of little use. And quite honestly, because it's going to be mounted, the roots I'm really interested in... Oh, you got backbiting, let me get in the way. The roots that I'm really interested in are these little white ones near the top. Now, they look to me like they've either dried up due to lack of humidity or they got munched by something prior to me getting it. Nonetheless, it's a Brassia. Brassia roots branch. Yeah? They love to. So once these little white roots actually get into some moss and get strapped in, they'll be off to a nice and fine life. So I'm going to trim some of these roots off, basically because they're not going on a mount. They're manky. That one's dry, you can come off. Quite honestly, those two are dry. I'll give them a little bit and then they might branch and they might not. That, no, that's all squishy. That one can go right near the base. If you're going to take a whole root off, take the whole root off. Don't muck about and leave a stump. That one's definitely gone. You can come off. You'll just be in the way. You're coming off. Yeah, I can work with that branched one. That one, it's soft near the end, but I'll keep some of it. That one is soft all the way through. So, doesn't look like there's a lot left, but there's enough for what I want. I've got a branched root here that I will actually double up. It's pliable, so I can actually do that with it. Yeah, so I don't need a huge mount. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be mounting. Not a lot left, and the first thing I'll do is run that under the tap because these roots are dry. Bit different to what I did before, trying to keep everything dry. I now want it wet. That'll help the roots bend if I need to. So, wet roots. I'll just close down a minute while I go and choose a suitable mount now that I know how big the plant's going to be, and I will have to do an estimate on how quickly it's going to push out new growths and which direction they're going to go. So it'll take a little bit of thought. I'll be back. Okay, so I've chosen this piece of bark. It's about the right size. This is English oak bark, not your normal cork bark. As you can see, it's quite thin, but being oak, it's also pretty tough and it lasts a good bit of time. Now, what I would normally do, I'm not going to show it because this one's been used before, is I would take the bark, I would take the sharp screwdriver and twist that and turn it until I got a nice hole, and then I would get a length of my bonsai wire and thread it through the hole and use the pliers to bend it round, making a hook. Yeah? It's not rocket science, is it? So, like Blue Peter, this is one I prepared earlier, only there is one thing I haven't done that is quite important. I store my bark out in the garden. I haven't got a clue what's living in those little creases and crevices, so that's now going to go in the sink and get boiling water poured over both sides and then rinsed under the cold tap. That's warm. I don't believe anything's going to survive that in any shape or form, including eggs, larvae, creatures, six-legged or otherwise. Okay, and that's hot. Obviously I wouldn't dream of putting a plant on that at the moment, so I'll now give it a rinse under the cold tap, having killed everything that might be living in it, and cool it off. This also serves a useful purpose because the bark is now wet. So the moss and everything, as I'm trying to use my 5 hands to do the mounting in a minute, it will stick and it will help me work. Okay, so we have our bark, we have our moss, we have our plant. And I work with dry hands, otherwise everything sticks to me. That's just me. If you had gloves on, you wouldn't dry your hands and they'd be wet and all your moss would stick to your gloves. You're not going to ever get me wearing gloves. I don't care how long I do this job. Okay, now I've got a choice. Do I put the back bulbs at the back, or do I put the new growth? New growth doesn't want to go at the back, because if it does push out yet another new growth, it'll have to squeeze its way, you know, between the back and the front. So that would be the obvious way for it to go, but it does mean when the new growths come out, they will hang in the air. So what about sideways on then? Yeah? Now I quite like that idea. Sideways. Bottom corner. Yeah? But then if the new growth decides to come out on that right hand side of that bulb, it's squashed. So it's going to have to go that way for practical reasons. It's going to climb. Whatever I do with it, it will try and go upwards. And basically I can stick some moss around the base here, and if it puts out a new growth that looks like it's going to hang in the air, I can tie some more moss in just to get the roots into something. So if that's where it's going to go, which doesn't look bad, does it? Notice I'm doing it quite low down, the reason being it's going to go up. If I stick it up here, thinking about, oh, I need to get the roots on the bark, then where the hell's the plant going to go? Plant's more important. So that'll go quite low down. The need to know where it's going to go is now, not in a minute, because now I've got to put the moss where it's needed. And I don't need much behind that plant. It's going to get a bit, not a lot, because those are back bulbs. Chances of those pushing out new roots are slim. So this is not much more than a cushion. Yeah? It will also be a place where hopefully some new roots can find somewhere to go a bit later on. So a little thin pad of moss for the plant to sit on. Not a lot. Dry hands. Plant. Okay? Alright. If that plant's going to go there, I'm hoping that root will come round, and yep, it will. And some of that root, with its branches, is going to get in moss straight away. That'll be good. So now what we need is some more moss. The idea being that some of these roots do actually get buried. See, now that root's brilliant. It's got a root tip. I'll make sure that that gets there when I've finished with a little tie so that it's right on the bark. That's going to hang on really fast, that one. That'll be good if it all works nicely. Now we need some round the base of the plant, because if it's going to push out some new roots from those nubbins, that's where they will be. So as you can see, I'm sort of building myself up a little network of moss in between the roots while it's flat on the ground. That's quite important, because in a minute we're going to have to pick it up and we don't want the whole flipping lot falling on the floor. So that's okay. I'm happy with that. In fact, I want a little bit more in between those two bulbs in case any roots come out the back of that front recent growth. Okay, so that's the sort of delicate bit, I suppose you could call it. Getting everything ready. Dry hands. Right, now we need something to tie it on with. That will be some fishing line. We're going to use this scissors. Right. This is cheap stuff. I don't care if I waste a metre of this. Don't end up with a piece that's too short. It will mess you up. You'll have to tie that piece off and go and cut yourself another piece and start again, and in the meantime half your plant will fall off and your moss will be on the floor. Get a decent length. That's far too much, I know that. Right, this bit, you do your own thing. I do what I want to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is tie a slip knot. That slip knot will have a nice long piece sticking out of it. Why is that? Well, because I'm going to want to tie the other end to it in a minute. It's quite important, that long bit sticking out. This stuff's fiddly enough at the best of times. Right, now comes the bit where the third hand would be really useful. That's got a loop on it, yeah? So I can hold my plant flat. I use my little finger to hold that in place while I get this over the roots and get it to a place where it will hold the plant, and because it's a slip knot, all I've got to do is wiggle it and it will become quite tight. And that becomes the first turn. The second one will follow quite close, and as I'm going I'm looking at what I'm doing with the roots, yeah, because some of those I want to get into the moss, so I bend them as I go and try and get them to be in the moss as best I can. So that one's held, that one's probably going to have to go up there, so that one's now held. That just leaves the one at the bottom to twist round, and we'll twist him round about there, put one more loop round there. Now we can start going back up. Yeah, that's the bottom done. So I can now go up in quite large zigzaggy sort of sections. Now I'm going to do something that with some plants I wouldn't need to do, and as I do it I'm going to tie that root in. I'm actually going in behind that back bulb. So I can hold that little root in there, stick my end through between those two bulbs. That will help secure the higher up part of the plant. Now obviously with fishing line it is capable of cutting in, so you don't want to pull ridiculously tight. It's only got to hold a plant in place. You're not holding a ship onto the side of its key side. It's just a little plant, and as long as it's reasonably firm it'll be fine. You always find the last loop is the hardest. It always wants to play up. There we go. Okay, so I've tied that little root in there. That will work nicely. That bulb's held. That bulb is held separately, and the last loop goes round to a tie-off point. As I say, what you do with your knots is entirely up to you. I've got my own way of tying, and I like it and it works for me. It's just based on pulling loops through and then getting another one to bind on. So nothing complicated, just a loop and then another couple more to make sure it stays firm. There we go. Any loose ends, take them off. You don't need that bit. So there we go, a mounted orchid. Yeah, it's nice and firm, yeah, won't wiggle about. I've got roots that are liable to branch, nicely placed, ends in moss and moss near the base. Not right up to the base, but very, very close. And some of the other roots are nicely placed on the moss. The branched root went in under the moss and has come out the top. The top is a new tip, a growing tip, and it's actually almost on the bark. I'm hoping that will attach. There we go. So that's how I would mount an orchid. The only other thing left to do is sort the tag out. Now what you can often do on a mount is just thread your tag through your bits of cord, and it'll sort of hold itself there. If that don't work, you might need to make a hole in it. Yeah, I think that's going to be a bit loose. That's probably not going to work this time. It does sometimes and not on others. The trouble is, it's a flimsy little cheap, I'll say it, tag. But that sort of thing, you can see what I mean. Yeah, just thread it in between your loops, and if it was a nice stiff tag, it'll probably stay there. If not, just make a little hole in it and just latch it on somehow. What a lot of people do is they make a hole in it and they actually thread it over the top of their hook, and it just hangs down there. Another choice. Okay, but as that's my only mounted Brassia, and my notes tell me that I've got that particular Brassia, I won't forget which one's which. So there we go. That's how I would mount a plant. The plant doesn't matter that much. If that was a Tulumnia, it wouldn't get as much moss. Other plants might get more moss. You just have to gear it up to the individual plant in question. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for dropping by. Now somewhere there's half a glass of wine with my name on it. I'll go and find it. Thanks for dropping by.